Welcome to the Play Create podcast. I'm Kirsten Gunnerud.
And I'm Jill Johnson.
This is a place to explore play and creativity.
It is, and this is where we come together and we play and create forward, which means that we give momentum to our ideas and our thoughts that have been kind of keeping us up every night.
Yeah, in every aspect of life, work, parenting, you name it, there's no place we won't go and explore.
And when it gets down to it, we just want to have fun.
So today we welcome Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Doctor has his PhD in organizational psychology, is the best-selling author of a book called Willpower Doesn't Work. And you've probably come across one of his blogs as they've reached over 100 million people through places like Forbes, Big Think, Fortune, Inc., Psychology Today. You also have one of our favorite TedX talks, which is the 100% rule.
Oh, nice.
Bill and I love the 100% rule. It's hugely powerful.
Mm-hmm. And we're excited because this week you're releasing a new book. Woohoo! And we're really excited to explore with you. It's called Personality Isn't Permanent. And in it, you debunk the pervasive myths of personality that have captured our lovely pop culture, including those personality tests we all love so much, or do we really? And not only do you debunk those, you give people a clear path forward to evolving their personalities in the directions of their imagination, rather than staying stuck in what has created their personalities up until this point. So, let's just start with the basics. What inspired you to write this book?
Oh, goodness. I think, a lot of different things, but the thing that was kind of the tipping point, I guess you could say, is I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Not sure if you guys have read that one, but that book was like, I was reading it with my interest in addiction because Willpower Doesn't Work. I wrote that book because I just have a family with a lot of background in addiction, even though there's a lot of different applications of Willpower Doesn't Work. And so I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, which is a book on trauma, kind of wanting to better understand addiction. And the thing that stood out huge to me was personality and about how much trauma shapes personality. And so that wasn't like the be all end all, but that kind of led me to realizing one of the key ways that personality becomes so repetitive, or our comfort zone gets so, we stay so tight within our comfort zone. And so I just thought, okay, I want to better understand personality, and I want to write a book that kind of helps people understand that this thing isn't what they think it is.
But when I started the book, I had to really think about what personality is, because I hadn't thought about it this way. And then at the end, you talk about personality comes from that root of persona, which is the mask that we wear. And then it makes so much sense.
It's kind of funny that I left that to the end, right?
Yeah. But I like that you did, actually, because it forced me to really think and work through my belief about what personality is and some other things with it. And yeah, I love it.
Kirsten has had a lot of experience with the personality tests, the strengths finder, stuff like that. And then I come from a therapeutic background. And one of the first things I noticed about myself was that I was not going to be a person that diagnosed. Like, they might influence, but I was watching so many clients be so defined by diagnoses that it became something that I really held in, and I immediately started shifting the way I came towards any type of therapeutic relationship. And then we've had some experiences where we've been put through tests, and we've had really funny moments where people have it's because you're this, you're ENFP and da-da-da-da. So I've always been really resistant to the testing model, just because I think there's information that's interesting, but I can also see in the wrong hands or the wrong mindset how it can really shift things. Where I think Kirsten there's been times where it's really powerful. So
sure.
I think
a lot of people have had powerful
kind of
experiences with it.
Like you said, the spectrum. And I want to know a little more about when you started seeing the tests. In the book, I loved when you talk about the red and the blue, and just all these moments where the test came up a little short. And is there more
Yeah.
that you're noticing as you work with people?
Yeah, and I'll actually share with you guys a link that you can put in the show notes. There's like a really short article that I have. I didn't write it actually, but it explains why type-based personality tests are not really a good way of looking at it. You know, it's really short, but it also provides a personality test based on the big five, which I kind of provide in the book.
Yes.
One important thing about test design is often with these tests, there's like a forced choice. You know what I mean? Where like you have 4 options and like none of them fit, you
I
know?
have a really hard time taking those tests because half of the questions I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not either.
Yeah. And like from a test design perspective, that is not a good way to design a test, any type of psychology test. Like usually what we use is what's called a Likert scale, which would be like, 1 out of 7, like, 1 being like strongly disagree to like 7 being like strong, fully agree, like where you have an option on a spectrum of answering, like, how much does this fit you? And like one answer might be none. But most of the type-based tests, they just give you a forced choice where you're like, I don't know if any of these really fit me. But anyways, one quick thing just to kind of throw out there at the beginning of all this is that identity and personality are 2 different things. Yeah. And from my perspective, identity is like 10x more important. And identity really is your self-concept. It's how you describe yourself. It's how you define yourself. And it's your self-concept. And your identity or your self-concept guides your behavior. It shapes what you say and what you do. And that over time becomes your personality. So your personality is very much the byproduct of your identity. And the thing about these tests, or really just any stories we tell about ourselves, is that they can be very personal. We tell stories about ourselves. These tests can give us a story because you get a score, and then that becomes your new identity. And when you have a strong sense of identity where you hold on to it very tightly, which is very easy for us to do, we have kind of a bias as people to really overvalue our present selves. Mm-hmm. For many different reasons, but we really overly value who we currently are, and we overly solidify who we think we are today, which is just not really true for both the past and the future. But when you have a strong identity, you seek to defend it, and you seek to like confirm your bias. And so these tests can really, if you take them overly seriously versus maybe taking them with a grain of salt, then you basically have this view of yourself that you're trying to defend and confirm, and it very much limits your imagination towards seeing yourself as someone different. And you've just overly basically defined who you are.
And what I love about your book is hitting directly on that. I work with so many people who have defined themselves into a hole that they believe that they can't, or they refuse to get out of. And you so beautifully, compassionately, and in a way that makes so much sense, help explain how to start crawling out of that hole and how not to get stuck in this thing that you think you've been defined by.
I was thinking about when you said that, Kirsten, is like, I really love when you talk about the empathetic ear, because, and just, we talk a lot about like just being a witness right now has so much power. And a lot of times I do a lot with like trauma and sexual trauma. And a lot of it is just the space, like just holding the space without judgment. So when my background's in arts and art therapy, so then I'm taking art, like where you talk about the first creative trauma. So I'm almost everybody I work with, I mean, almost everyone in this world has some creative trauma, something that someone said. And then when we bring it into art therapy, we're taking a benign kind of idea of the risk of exposure and vulnerability with our creative trauma, and kind of overlaying it with our actual trauma and disrupting this narrative that is, I always talk about the tapestry, and like, we're this beautiful tapestry, but why do we keep pulling this one thread and trying to just make everything else catch on to it? And so I really love that idea of like being the ear and being present with what it is without the fix. And it's really hard because we're in that fix-it culture. And so that brought me to a lot of what you talk about with process. And I'm just really curious about how I always say, hey, it's process art. Like, don't worry about the product, but we're also starting with an intention. So I think that aligns with your goal. But I use the word like it's process art. So if you get a result, awesome. But if you need to throw it away because it's held it for that moment, great. So I was just curious about your idea.
Well, I wonder about what the purpose of the art would be. If the purpose is just to explore, then that is the result, right? If the purpose is like to like eventually become a professional writer or author of, like creative of some sort, then like that's a different goal. So I think whatever the intention is, even if it's just learn about yourself, then that is that will actually shape the process, you know? Yeah, it's really interesting about the whole creative trauma, because I actually literally had one last weekend.
Really?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So like I'm a member of various groups, and there's a group I'm a part of, which, you know, I've like been a part of for a few years and like very invested in and like very care about. And I gave a presentation literally about this book, and I was seeking their help. I was literally asking the group, I want your help with this book launch. And it just fell apart. It was super embarrassing. I was very unprofessional. I looked like I had no clue what I was doing. I poorly explained the book, I couldn't even ask for help. And it just went totally wrong. I had a horrible weekend. And just because I was like caught up in it. And one of my favorite kind of ideas is that like all progress starts by telling the truth. And that kind of goes to seeking an empathetic witness. And so I actually reached out to the guy who was running the group, and I just told him, honestly, I'm not even sure if I should be in this group anymore. Like, you know, that's one of the things about trauma is literally it eliminates options. You know, it creates black and white thinking. And I was like, I just told him, I'm like, I just want to share with you how I'm feeling, because after that experience, to me, it feels like I don't know how to ask for help in this group. I don't even know if this group can help me, which then makes me wonder, can I even help this group? And I just thought, I don't even know if I should be in this group anymore. And he's like, you know, this is just how you're viewing things, which again is exactly what trauma is all about. It's the meaning you give to an experience based on your emotions. And so like I went back and forth with him rather than keeping it in my head, which I'm really glad I did, because over the weekend I was able to reframe it, you know. But then I just thought to myself, and this is, I think, the proper framing of the past is that it happened for me, not to me. Like, I think the past can be chosen to be viewed from a positive lens no matter what occurred. And so I actually chose to view this experience last weekend as this was the best meeting I've ever had, because I just learned so much stuff that I've never learned before. And so I sent a message to my friend and said, I'm choosing to view this as the best meeting I've ever had, because if that's the lens that I give to that experience, then now I don't have to leave the group. And also I still have possibilities in my future. Whereas if I go with the other way, that like, this group's not for me, you know, then I only have one option, that's to leave. And therefore I lose all of the other agency. So it's interesting, but I think we have to choose the meanings we give to our experiences.
I love it. It reminds me of that quote. I can't remember who said it. Maybe you do, Kirsten, like, the past as a guiding post, not as a hitching post, but like to have it, you know, be that place of influence and understanding versus just like, well, that's what happened and that it's just going to stay there like that, because it's just what we create.
Yeah. I try and look at those bad experiences as, what am I learning from this, right?
Totally.
I had a similar one a couple of weeks ago. I tend to avoid networking things. And I had to get on this networking thing and do my little quick elevator speech. And it was awkward and it wasn't, you know, but I got off and I started to want to go in that direction, but then I was like, oh, wait, no, now I see, like, I can see what I need to fix, and I can see how I need to tighten this up, and I can see. And so as hard as it was, I wouldn't have gotten that if I hadn't been willing to put myself out there with these people and take that risk, which then helped me see what else needed to be shaped. And so sometimes we have to embarrass ourselves a little to.
What I like about what you're saying, because I actually view personality and comfort zone as basically synonyms, like they're the same concept. And so like you taking a risk, you facing uncertainty, then exposed you to so many ways that you could now think differently that wouldn't have been available to you had you not gone out there and dealt with that, right? And so I think we call it prediction errors, you know, in like neuroscience and psychology, where you make a mistake or you just become exposed to something you had no clue of before. And you're like, oh, I guess I can rethink that a little bit. Yeah. And I think that that's what for me, creates what's called psychological flexibility, where you can start seeing things from different angles and like being able to handle things. That's the goal, I think, when you said turning it into learning, is that the goal of the past is information, not so much, emotion clogged up.
Well, and I think this is such a timely, look at where we are right now. So
totally,
everyone, the comfort zone is,
smashed.
Many people except for like friends that might just have tons of cash just hanging out and no stress at all. But most people, the comfort zone is very real, and it's being pressed upon, if not daily, minute by minute. And so as this is coming out in this time, what are it's so fascinating to have this emerge right now.
Mm-hmm.
But what's kind of like your future self thinking when you're looking at, oh, this was released during the pandemic, and what did I see happen with my readers and their comfort zone?
I think the concept of the future self really does help me get through this situation. I actually last month read Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, twice. Like I just went through it. Have you guys read that one?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's worth rereading, particularly in light of COVID-19. But it's also really relevant to all the research on future self, because one of the things that Viktor Frankl said was that without having like a clear sense of hope and purpose for your future, the present becomes meaningless. And like he wrote the book in the context of the Holocaust, where like they were literally starving, going through gas chambers, everything was taken away from them. And he said that when people lost hope in the future, that the present became unbearable. If the suffering of the moment lost meaning, they literally gave up the will to live. And often what people would do is they would place their hope into a specific date. For example, like they were like, we're going to get out by Christmas. And the death rates would spike between Christmas and New Year's, because once that date would pass, their hope was gone and they had nothing left to hope in because they had placed it on a date. And so once their hope was gone, literally the present became too hard to handle. I think in our case with COVID, or even just when you get thrown off course, if you don't have like a purpose or a future self that's driving you, then the present becomes just a distraction, or you just try to distract yourself from it because there's no context, no meaning. And so I think that, that's been something that I've thought a lot about with COVID and just with my situation. Do you honestly need to have hope in a future in order to even be in the present? As weird as that sounds. Like Frankl actually said that. He said the peculiarity of man is that they have to live their life by looking to the future. And I think that people think that that's like anti-Buddhism because you're not being in the present, but it's actually the only way to be in the present with intention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
The other interesting thing I'm noticing with this context, and you talk about it relative to someone in 2008, but for some people, that this sudden change in context is inviting them to think about that intention and that hope in entirely
gives them space.
New ways that are, they're seeing their whole lives, or at least their vision for their lives, transform, because it's completely redefined what matters and how they want to experience their lives. And again, what I love about this book is I think it gives great tools to do that.
It'd be weird to say, a lot of our lives haven't been reshaped to some degree because of this huge event. So I see that a lot, and I think that kind of to some degree, but in a different way, like me with that bad experience last week, like, in psychology, we call it a refractory period, right? But it's like this, you choose a better framing so that you can get back to whatever chosen future you want, the better, So like in my case, I didn't want a long refractory period with this last weekend. I was like, I need to figure this out emotionally so that I can get back to hoping and strategizing and living rather than being so caught up. And so I think for people who are having a lot of new time to think about things and maybe to reconceptualize what a better purpose or a more meaningful purpose is, or a more relevant purpose given everything that happened, I think the sooner they get to the drawing board and start choosing a goal, even if it's a small goal that they can work towards so that they can then shift the goal or expand it, the better, and the people who are going to just be slammed by this thing for months or years, because it did change a lot of things. Like it's your choice how long you want to extend, the emotional stuckness of it all.
Well, and I think what you did, you talk about this in the book as well, is you allowed yourself to feel those emotions.
Big.
We as human beings don't like to do. And yet that's probably, and I won't even say probably, in my belief, that is what got you through that in the time period that you did, is you allowed yourself to feel that. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I would probably be ignorant to say I'm through it, but I'm definitely feeling it. Very embarrassed, very frustrated, very confused, and figuring it out fast. And to me, that's what we call psychological flexibility. It's handling, it's dealing with emotions. It's not taking them so seriously. It's holding them lightly. It's not being defined by the present. It's not, not thinking that wherever I'm at right now is it. Even my former, 2 days ago performance, I'm not defined by that. Yeah. I love Carol Dweck's work, honestly, her work on mindset. And she's very much big on people with a fixed mindset are defined by now. She calls it the tyranny of now, versus people with the growth mindset have they focus on not yet. And so I just think, it's been helpful to realize for me that wherever I'm at right now, whatever I'm feeling right now, or even who I am right now isn't the be all end all, and that things can be very different in the future, and that I have a lot of agency over what happens. And through helpful conversations and through handling emotions and through experiencing them, there's a lot of learning, and you always look back and you feel good about it, even if it feels terrible in the moment.
In the moment. Yeah. I do something called Flight Camp, and I teach psychological flexibility. Beautiful. In context of people's lives. But what's interesting is where I get the most resistance is not wanting to go out of the comfort zone in terms of those feelings. So what advice would you give to somebody? What do you got, Jilly?
I have resistance, a universal force that stops people from engaging in creative acts. I love that one.
Because it's so overwhelming. It's so scary. They feel so big.
Mm-hmm. Again, kind of like with Frankl, it really helps to have a purpose to the emotions. I wouldn't choose a lot of the emotions I put myself through if I didn't have a purpose. I think a lot of people, they view personality at a very surface level where it's all about pain and pleasure. You do the things that are pleasurable, you avoid the things that are painful. You do what you think is natural, you avoid what's not natural, and from my perspective, having a sense of purpose that is freely chosen, and Frankl says the same thing. Let me just read you a quote from Frankl real quick, just because I've been loving him too much lately. But he says this. He says, "I consider it a dangerous misconception of mental hygiene to assume that what man needs in the first place is equilibrium, or as it is called in biology, homeostasis, i.e. a tensionless state. What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task." So I just think the whole dealing with the emotions is not, from my perspective, useful unless it's for a purpose. So I think that's a big step for people, is just choosing what would be something meaningful for them, even if it's just to develop a healthier relationship with themselves or a family member, a reason for putting themselves out there in a more vulnerable way.
I think that's what finally shifted it for me with all the things I had to deal with there's multiple ways it was presented, and it just finally made sense. I think that I was doing more harm not dealing with them than I would, even though it was going to be, there was so much anxiety over going there, but that once I really truly dove into them, that was going to help take me through. And there was some purpose behind it, right? But that got so painful that I almost didn't have a choice, I would say. I hate to say it, but another thing that propelled me to finally deal with it was it just wasn't a state I wanted to live in anymore. And I think what was presented to me, which again, I think your book does too, is you don't have to live like that anymore. And here's how you step through it.
Yeah, I agree. I prefer the future predicting my behavior rather than the past. I think that's a more intentional way to live versus being on autopilot. And I think that kind of going back again to the whole empathetic witness conversation, the more you can build supportive people who support you and who you're striving to be, and non-judgmental, but like people you can, that allows you to more safely get comfortable being vulnerable, more safely get comfortable being wrong or trying or presenting ideas or changing your mind. It just allows you the space to even just handle the emotions of growth. You know, all progress starts by telling the truth. And so by telling the truth more regularly and more quickly, you do often face your emotions. And I think for me, journaling is a big one. You know, I journal every single day, you know, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And for me, it's such an emotional regulation tool where it's just like, you know, I journaled this morning about what happened last week. And so I'm quickly integrating it into my life and not keeping it as an isolated structure. But I'm like, I want to understand how this fits and how I can do something about it and what this. And so I think regular just health practices, exercise, you know, writing in your journal about your feelings and your goals and your thoughts, having open conversations with friends and mentors about what you're dealing with. The faster you can have these kind of things in place, the less bogged down you are and confused you are by your emotions, but the more you can handle them. You know, another Frankl quote is just that emotions which are suffering cease to be suffering when you give them a clear picture, you know, and actually same thing is said in Body Keeps the Score. You know, I think just getting it out of you and giving it a form so that you can then manage it and think about it and realize you're not alone. You're not a fool. Like this is something that, you know, other people can handle, you know, like you can handle this.
That was the other catalyst for me, was when I first started to understand that a lot of my health issues were coming from emotion, which you talk about so beautifully and simply in the book, not from some real health issue. If that's kind of hard to explain, right?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Jane's story is actually literally in the book about that, right?
Yes. And it's so powerful. And it's, and even Jane, right? Like those of us who know better still fall into this. I think we're all human. You just had this experience, right? Like it's so
normal.
important.
We're all going to have it in the future too.
And I love anyone telling their stories who's so willing to be so honest about that. Cause I think so, at least when I started exploring and understanding people's perspectives, so many what I viewed as gurus, it sounded like you figure this out and the clouds part and everything is just, you know, perfect from then on. And it isn't. It's, you learn the tools to work with what shows up, but we all still fall into these traps, and it's just how quick do we become aware of it and how do we work with it, and how do we grow from it. But that was the other thing that finally propelled me to really start dealing with my feelings, was realizing that all these physical issues I was having actually had an emotional foundation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think with the gurus or whatnot, like if like, I'm always attracted to people who are striving for a future self. And so although they may be a teacher in one respect, they're also very much the student in another respect. And that they're very much in a state of becoming and very much in a state of failing. Like if you're pursuing a future self that's above and beyond where you're currently at, then you're going to go through a lot of failure and emotional ups and downs to get there. And so, yeah, I like being around people whose future is bigger than their past, regardless of how great they think they are.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when you talk about this, then what about, when you get so like growth oriented and goals, how do you help people understand the fine line of setting like the goal that is encompassing versus staying busy? Like, I feel like this moment we're in has helped unwrap the busy factor, like the status of busy. And so when all of a sudden we get into this, like the personalities that want to keep striving, how do we separate what is busyness versus really attending to your goals and your future self?
Mm-hmm. I think that's super good and difficult for all of us to do. I think because I view the future self as a drafting process, just like you would draft like a book, and I think that over time, hopefully we have experiences, like hopefully my goals are actually simpler than my former self's goals, and hopefully my future self's goals are more simple even than my current self's goals, because I think maturity like lends itself to simplicity. And so I think a lot of it, when you actually create a future self, should actually simplify your life, because it actually creates clear-cut boundaries so that you can be true to, you can be intentional in a direction, which forces you to not be, open to all options. It actually creates the decision point. And so as an example, like when I'm quite busy. I don't work after 3 p.m. as an example, but like about 6 months ago, I had to really make a decision in my mind if I wanted to like go really big in one area, and I had to stop being so broad in other areas of my life. And that required me to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations with people who I love and respect and admire, and tell them, I can't be involved in your work anymore. Like I still want to very much be friends with you, but I can't actually invest much of myself into the goals that you would like me to invest. Just like people who want to collaborate or whatnot, or even, and so I think that actually in clarifying a future self, it forces you, if you're honest with it, to clear a lot of the clutter that is keeping you busy. I'm very much like a fan of important and busy are two different things, and the urgent and important are two different things. And I think that future self, if you're clear about it, puts you in the realm of doing things that are important, and often not so busy. But I also, I also just think that in the future, hopefully we have perspectives and gain experiences that allow us to even clarify and simplify even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Benjamin, every week we invite people to try something out for the next week, to just, no matter how resistant, no matter how much they hate the idea, or maybe they love it, to just for the next week, just try this and see how it fits. Knowing that, there's probably some tools that work for everybody, but there's also what resonates with people, and to just, if you don't try it and play with it, you don't know if it works for you, right? What tool would you invite people, or which tool do you think is most powerful?
Well, a thought that I think is foundational knowledge is just that your current self is different from your former self and different from your future self, that you're totally not the same person you were in the past. Yeah. One interesting thing about memory is that our memory constantly updates itself based on our current perspective. And so like my view of my past is different from my former views, but like that can actually lead you to thinking you're the same person you were in the past, because, it's all updated together, but you're actually not. You see the world differently. You would make different decisions. And so your current self is very temporary. Your future self is going to be different. So you don't have to be so definitive about your current self. You can be a little bit more flexible, like when you mess up, or, in how you see things, you can change your mind. And so, but I do think, with that in mind, that your current self is not the be all end all. As Daniel Gilbert says, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. You're not finished. You don't have a fixed mindset. You're not stuck in the now. There is a future that can be adapted to and changed to. I think given that fact, it is really important to define your future self. Like that's essential territory. Like you can't live positively in the present without knowing who you want to be in the future. A lot of research on that. Hal Hirschfield at UCLA and others have, talked about decision making. You can't make powerful, intentional decisions, and if you're only going off of your current moment by moment preferences. Because moment by moment, I might just want to sit and eat a big bag of Doritos because that's what I'm in the mood for right now because I'm overwhelmed. And so you need to define your future self. Who is that person in 2 to 3 years? Like I like 2 to 3 years. You could go 10, 20 years out into the future if you want, but I like the practicality of 2 to 3 years. And who do you want to be in 2 to 3 years from now?
So in your journal or on a piece of paper, play with
2 steps. Think about who you would like to be in 2 to 3 years from now. You choose the timeline. I think timelines are good to set based on like what makes sense to you. Sure. It could even be a year from now if there's like some personal date in a year from now that excites you. But sometime in the next 2 to 3 years, who do you want to be? Could be similar to who you are now, but like, what are the circumstances you'd like to have? What would you like to be doing? What would you like to be spending your time on? What attributes or characteristics would you like to have that you don't currently have? How would you like your relationships to be? Just like literally think about your situation and the person you'd like to be and what you'd like to be doing. Without that clear future self, you can't actually make intentional decisions today. You can't make informed decisions today because your goal does shape your process. What you do today should be influenced by where you want to go. And the more specific you get on that, the more clear your process, which increases motivation and hope. And so once you've actually just taken some time to do that, and again, it's a draft. If you do it in the journal regularly, it will clarify, especially as you move forward in small ways, you'll get aware of things, just like you mentioned, that you wouldn't be aware of right now. And so then you maybe will adjust it a little bit. But clarify that. And then I would say big challenge number 2 is start telling people about that future self. Big one. That takes it from an idea to a word. When you start using words, it really signals something very powerful to your identity, where you start to believe it more because now you're talking to people about it. Oh, yeah, I'm going to, start a podcast, just as one random example. Like you start hearing yourself talk to people about it, big signal to your identity. And that then leads you to seeking to be more consistent with your words, more consistent with your future self and your actions, which obviously is really big for building confidence and handling uncertainty. So I would invite people to take the time in their journal. Could be 10, 20, 30 minutes, however deep you want to go, and just clarify who you'd like to be in 2 to 3 years from now. And then start telling people important to you that that's where you want to go and that you'd like their support. Like that would be big.
I love that idea. And I pulled it from when, I think it was chapter 4, Shift Your Story, when you started with a quote from Gordon Livingston that says, "The stories of our lives, far from being fixed narratives, are under constant revision." And just the idea that this is not a fixed. So if you make a goal today, it can change tomorrow. Like, don't be so
big time.
That
you're not stuck in it.
Yeah, we're revising all the time, and that you're okay to edit. You don't have to put it into.
It's up to you, right?
Yeah.
I know one of my predispositions to the word goal used to be it was always financial, or it was always these like societal views of what success meant, and that's what goals were taking you to. But goals don't necessarily mean that. Your goal might be to spend 2 weeks just listening to your heart and seeing where it takes you. Your goal might be pausing. Your goal, your goal can be anything. It's just what that is that's serving you and that your future self is inviting you towards. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, from a psychological perspective, all behavior is goal driven. If I want to go to the bathroom, it's because I have the goal. I have a goal. If I want to go to the grocery store, like every behavior is outcome seeking. So you can't actually act without a goal. And so in this case, it's just saying, what are you wanting to experience, or what are you wanting to direct your life towards? You can give it the word purpose, you can give it the word goal, you can give it the word intention, but what is the thing that you're pointing it towards, the aim, so that you actually have a direction to go, and what is the outcome you're seeking? And so, it could be, traveling the world. It could be, meditating for 20 minutes, whatever the goal is.
Not waking up at 2 in the morning.
Yeah, but I just think it's about directing your brain and directing your attention and directing your identity. Because your identity is the way you view yourself, and it's the thing that drives your behavior, and it's the thing that ultimately shapes the person you become. And so rather than being on autopilot because of being so defined by the past or by your present roles and personas, why not dictate where you want to go as an identity and ultimately shape that as yourself?
Yeah, Kirsten and I always talk about the compass. Like, where's that true north, so that your compass, your inner compass is always kind of reorienting to where you need to go. And if you have enough of these things that are creating the foundation, it will keep pointing you in that direction.
Every step shows a new insights you wouldn't have had if you hadn't taken it.
Totally.
So
exposure.
Right. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't know, this came from a dear friend. I don't know where it came from originally, but things come towards you when you walk. And right.
I love that. Yeah.
Hiking, if you think about, you take one more step and all of a sudden there's this view you didn't know was going to be there. And that's how life works too, when we take those steps. Okay. So
I think that's beautiful.
This week is spend time with your future self and
romanticize it. Give it some roses.
Yes.
Take it to dinner.
Totally.
So Ben, where can people find you? If they want to learn more, they want to connect with you more, where are the places they should go?
Just benjaminhardy.com. Totally fine. I definitely invite people to check out Personality Isnt Permanent. You can get the book anywhere. But yeah, benjaminhardy.com is where my blogs are. There's free courses and stuff like that. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've had
so much
fun talking with you and appreciate everything you are doing in the world. So thank you.
Welcome.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe.
And definitely share it with all your friends.
Heck yeah. We can all use more play and creativity in our lives.
Yes, especially with our friends.
Yes. Check us out on social media. We're at Rocket Trike Studios. We'd love to have you join us there.